It is another day in the grand atrium of the Fire Dust Coven, humming with nascent power. Dozens of young witches, their robes the color of autumn leaves, focused on making flames dance, water ripple, or small stones levitate. The air smelled of ozone, dried herbs, and youthful ambition. In a corner, away from the chattering groups, sat Lilith. Her power was not in her hands, but in her mind. She was a psychic, a rare and dreaded lineage. Whispers followed her like shadows. "They always turn," the older witches would murmur, not knowing she could hear their thoughts as clearly as spoken words. The visions consume them. The power eats the person from the inside out. Lilith dreaded the quiet moments, the moments when the mental shield she painstakingly maintained would slip, and the chaotic symphony of other people's thoughts would flood in. Their fears, their secrets, their quiet judgments of her. Her only solace was the warm, unwavering mental signature of her parents, a constant, loving hum from their cottage on the coven's outskirts. Today, Instructor Morwen was teaching them to delve into the well of potential, the inner source of their magic. "Find the core of your power," Morwen's voice echoed in the vast hall. "Touch it, but do not let it consume you. Balance is the key." Lilith closed her eyes, retreating inward. She found her well, not a placid pool, but a swirling dark vortex of energy. Tentatively she reached for it. The moment her consciousness touched the vortex, it seized her. The atrium, the other students, the smell of herbs, everything vanished. She was plunged into a vision of terrifying clarity. She saw herself, but not herself. Her eyes were pools of obsidian, her face a mask of cold fury. Lightning, black as midnight, cracked from her fingertips. The grand atrium was rubble around her. The forests were burning. The sky was choked with ash. And she was utterly, completely alone. There were no thoughts to hear, no minds to touch, just a silent, dead world with her as its dark queen. A scream built in her throat, a scream that shattered mountains in the vision. Back in the atrium, Lilith's physical form began to levitate, a low moan escaping her lips. A corona of black energy crackled around her. "Lilith!" Instructor Morwen shouted, her face etched with alarm. She rushed forward, her hands glowing with a golden binding light. "Lilith, come back. I call your spirit home." The moment Morwen's magic touched the black corona, it recoiled violently. A shockwave of pure psychic force erupted from Lilith, hurling Morwen across the hall. She slammed into the stone wall with a sickening crunch and slid to the floor, unconscious. The blast destabilized the room. Half the students were thrown from their feet. Levitating stones dropped, summoned water splashed across the floor, and several small fires sputtered out. A collective cry of terror rose as the young witches stared at the hovering, trembling form of their classmate. Lilith's eyes snapped open. She gasped, falling to the cold stone floor. Her body ached. She saw the chaos she had wrought, the terrified faces, the fallen instructor. The whispers in their minds were no longer whispers. They were screams. "Monster! She's a monster! I knew it! She's turning!" A sob ripped from her throat. She scrambled to her feet and ran. She burst out of the coven's great doors and into the surrounding woods, the thorns and branches tearing at her robes as if the forest itself rejected her. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sounds of the coven were far behind her, until the ground fell away and she found herself standing on the edge of a high cliff, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. Below, the jagged teeth of rocks awaited the sea. This was it. This was the only way to stop the vision from coming true. To save the world from the monster she was destined to become. Tears blurred her vision as she stared into the abyss. She took a deep, shuddering breath, preparing to step into nothingness. A rather permanent solution to a temporary problem, don't you think? The voice was calm, male, and utterly unfamiliar. It held no fear, no judgment. Lilith froze but didn't turn. "Go away," she whispered, her voice raw. "I can't do that," the stranger said. "Not until you tell me why a witch of the Fire Dust Coven stands on the edge of the world." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. "Why? 'Cause I am a curse. Psychic. A future destroyer of worlds. The story tumbled out of her then, to this unseen listener who would be her last. She spoke of the fear in the atrium, the loneliness that had been her only companion, the vision of the desolate world she would create. I have no friends. No one but my parents, and I would rather die than have them see me become that. My power is only capable of evil. It's all I'll ever be. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the wind and the distant crash of waves. You're wrong, the boy said, his voice firm. That is not all you are. She finally turned her head. He stood a few paces behind her, a boy with kind, green eyes and hair the color of sand. He wasn't from the coven. He wore simple traveler's clothes. How would you know? She spat, anger flaring through her grief. Because evil doesn't weep for the pain it might cause, he said softly. Evil doesn't run away to protect others. It stays and takes. He took a step closer, then another, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. He didn't stop until he was beside her, the toes of his boots at the very edge of the cliff. He didn't look at the drop. He looked only at her. He held out his hand. My name is Elias. Come away from the edge. She stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a foreign object. Why? Why do you care? Because I would like to be your friend, he said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. But if you insist on jumping. He moved his hand closer to hers, his gaze unwavering. Then I'm going to have to jump with you. I can't let my first potential friend face the rocks alone. Lilith's breath hitched. The sheer, absurd kindness of it shattered the last of her resolve. Why? She asked again, her voice a broken whisper. Why would you do that for me? Elias smiled, a small gentle thing. I told you. I just want to be your friend. A great, racking sob tore through her. The tension, the fear, the self-loathing, it all broke like a dam. She stumbled away from the precipice and into his waiting arms, burying her face in his shoulder as she wept. He held her firmly, his grip strong and sure, saying nothing, just letting the storm of her grief pass. When her tears finally subsided into shaky hiccups, he gently loosened his embrace and took her hand. Come on, he said softly. Let's get you down from here. And for the first time in her life, as Lilith let this strange boy lead her away from the edge and back towards the world, she felt a flicker of something other than dread. It was small and fragile, but it was there, a tiny defiant spark of hope, kindled by an outstretched hand in the darkness. The walk back through the woods was a silent one, but the silence was no longer heavy with despair. It was filled with the gentle rustle of leaves underfoot and the lingering warmth of Elias's hand in hers. When the familiar warm glow of her family's cottage windows appeared between the trees, Lilith felt a fresh wave of anxiety, but it was tempered by the memory of his kindness. At the garden gate, she stopped and turned to him. Thank you, she whispered, her voice still thick from crying. You saved me. I don't even know your name. The boy with the kind eyes gave her a small, enigmatic smile. It's Damien, he said. I'm new in town. Before she could ask another question, about where he was from or how he'd found her, the air around him shimmered. A gentle breeze picked up, swirling the fallen leaves at his feet. To Lilith's astonishment, his form seemed to dissolve into the wind itself, becoming a swirl of dust and air that danced for a moment before scattering into the night, leaving only the scent of ozone and a profound sense of wonder. An elemental, a witch of air. It explained his sudden appearance and his calming presence. She stood for a moment longer, staring at the empty space where he had been, before squaring her shoulders and walking to the front door. The comforting warmth of the cottage was immediately shattered by the scene in the living room. Instructor Morwen, her arm in a sling and a nasty bruise coloring her temple, sat stiffly on the sofa. Beside her was the imposing figure of Proprietress Valeria, the stern leader of the Fire Dust Coven. Her parents stood before them, her father Gandalf's face a mask of grim concern, her mother Edna's tight with worry. The moment Lilith entered, 4 pairs of eyes locked onto her. The warmth she had felt with Damien evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "Lilith," her mother said, her voice strained. "Come in, darling. We need to talk. Proprietress Valeria and Instructor Morwen are here about what happened in class today." Lilith's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the sharp, accusing thoughts of the 2 Coven officials. Unstable, dangerous, a liability. She wrapped her arms around herself, building a fragile mental wall. I'm sorry," she stammered, addressing Morwen. "The magic. It took over. I lost control. It was an accident." It was mostly the truth, a desperate plea for understanding. Instructor Morwen's lips thinned. "An accident," she interrupted, her voice cold. "I felt your will in that blast, Lilith. It was not a loss of control. It was a deliberate, violent expulsion of power. You threw me against a wall." Lilith's blood ran cold. "No, that's not. It is exactly what happened," Proprietress Valeria cut in, her voice final. "We have multiple accounts. Your power is unstable and cannot be tamed by our conventional methods. For the safety of every student and instructor at the Firedust Coven, it is my strong recommendation that you are withdrawn. Permanently." Lilith looked frantically at her parents. Her mother opened her mouth to protest, but Gandalf placed a heavy hand on her arm, silencing her. He looked at the proprietress, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of weary acceptance. "We understand," he said, his voice low and resonant. "We will see to Lilith's education privately. Thank you for bringing your concerns to us directly." The dismissal was clear. With curt nods, the 2 Coven officials swept out of the cottage, the door clicking shut with a sound of finality. The moment they were gone, the tension snapped. 5 schools, Gandalf. Edna whirled on her husband, her eyes blazing. 5 in 2 years. This is getting ridiculous. When does it end? When do we stop running? "We are not running, Edna," Gandalf replied, his voice calm but firm. "We are protecting our daughter. That environment is not safe for her. The fear in that room tonight. It was a poison. I will always put her safety above convenience, above tradition, above everything." "And what is your plan?" Edna demanded, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "To keep her locked in this cottage forever." "No," Gandalf said, a hint of a plan forming in his steady gaze. "I have already found her a private tutor, someone who understands unique gifts. He arrives tomorrow morning." The next morning, Lilith was pulled from a fitful sleep by her father's voice calling up the stairs. "Lilith, your tutor is here. Come down, please." She groaned, dragging herself out of bed. The events of the previous day felt like a heavy cloak around her shoulders. She had no energy for a new tutor, for more pitying or fearful looks. She pulled on a rumpled robe over her pajamas, her hair a tangled mess, and trudged down the stairs, bracing herself. She entered the living room, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, I'm not really presentable," she began before forcing herself to look up. And there he was. Sitting calmly on the sofa, a cup of tea in his hand, was Damien. He was no longer in traveler's clothes, but in simple dark robes. His kind green eyes met hers, and a warm, knowing smile touched his lips. Lilith froze, her cheeks flushing a deep, mortified crimson. The boy who had seen her at her absolute worst, who had talked her down from a cliff's edge, was now sitting in her living room. The embarrassment was so acute it was physical, a hot wave that washed over her from head to toe. "Good morning, Lilith," Damien said, his voice as calm as it had been on the cliff. "It's good to see you again." Gandalf looked between them, a gentle smile on his face. "Ah, I see you've already met. Lilith, this is Damien. He'll be your new tutor." Lilith could only stare, the world tilting on its axis once more. Her savior, her secret, was now her teacher. And he was smiling, as if finding a suicidal witch in her pajamas was the most normal beginning to a tutoring relationship in the world. The silence in the living room stretched, thick with Lilith's mortification and Damien's unreadable calm. It was Gandalf who broke it, his voice gentle but firm. "Lilith, this is Damien. He's the tutor I told you about." "Damien, my daughter, Lilith." Damien rose smoothly to his feet and offered a slight, formal bow. "A pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice even, betraying no hint of their shared secret. Lilith, her heart performing a frantic drum solo against her ribs, managed a stiff nod. "Hello," she squeaked, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were a captivating hazel in the morning light, not just green as she'd thought in the dark. "We've scheduled sessions for 2 hours on weekends," Gandalf continued, oblivious to the charged undercurrent. "Starting this Saturday." "Actually," Damien interjected, turning his polite smile to Gandalf, "since it's Friday and I have no other engagements, we could begin now if it's convenient. No time like the present to lay a foundation." Edna, who had been watching the exchange with a mother's sharp eye, turned to Lilith. "Is that all right with you, dear? You must still be tired from yesterday." Lilith was lost again, studying the subtle curve of Damien's smile, the way his hair fell across his brow. She was jolted back to reality by the soft, almost imperceptible sound of her mother clearing her throat, a subtle, familiar signal. "Wah! Yes. Of course," Lilith stammered, her cheeks flaming. I need 30 minutes to get ready." Without waiting for a reply, she spun on her heel and fled up the stairs. In her room, a whirlwind of panic ensued. A quick bath was followed by a frantic debate over her wardrobe. Nothing felt right. Too formal. Too casual. She finally settled on a simple, dark tunic and soft trousers. Practical but flattering. She brushed her hair until it shone, her hands trembling with a strange, nervous energy. Exactly 30 minutes later, she descended the stairs, her heart in her throat. The living room was empty except for Damien, who was standing by the fireplace, examining a carved runestone. "Your parents left for work," he said, turning as she entered. "They wished us a productive session." The sudden intimacy of being alone with him was overwhelming. The first question that burst from her lips was the one screaming in her mind. Did you tell them about the cliff?" Damien's expression softened. He shook his head. "That is between you and me. Our little secret." A wave of relief so potent it made her knees weak washed over her. "Thank you," she breathed. "So, what are we going to do?" "The session will be in the woods," he said, gesturing toward the door. "Nature soothes the mind. It helps quiet the noise, making it easier to access the core of your magic without the interference of... without interference." He led her to a sun-dappled clearing by the serene lake where she had found solace before. They sat on the soft moss, facing each other in a lotus position. "The first step to reaching the depth of your magic is not to grasp for power," Damien instructed, his voice a calming murmur. "It is to connect with your chi, your inner energy. Find its flow. Breathe with it." Lilith closed her eyes and tried. But the moment she turned inward, the dark vortex of her power surged to meet her. Visions flickered at the edges of her consciousness. The crumbling atrium, the silent world, the obsidian-eyed version of herself. She flinched back, her breath catching in a gasp. For an hour she tried and failed, each attempt repelled by the terrifying guardians of her own soul. Frustrated, she scrambled to her feet. "This isn't working." Calm as ever, Damien rose too. "What is holding you back, Lilith?" "Nothing. I'm fine," she lied, hugging her arms tightly around herself. Damien studied her for a long moment. "Then we'll try a different path. Do you trust me?" She looked into his pretty hazel eyes, saw the boy who had chosen to jump with her, and found her answer. She nodded. Without another word, he raised a hand. A gentle, swirling wind lifted from the ground, coiling around her. With a gasp of pure astonishment, Lilith felt her feet leave the earth. The breeze held her cradled perfectly, suspending her a few feet in the air. It was bewildering, terrifying, and utterly enchanting. She was floating, weightless, cradled by his magic. Now, Damien's voice was a steady anchor in her bewilderment. Try again. Listen only to my voice. Let everything else fall away. Held aloft by his trust and his magic, the usual dread couldn't find purchase. She closed her eyes, and this time when she reached inward, she slipped past the initial fear. She dove deeper than ever before, following the sound of his voice until she found it, the core of her power. It wasn't a vortex here, but a vast, dark citadel, ancient and imposing. And standing guard before its gates were not abstract fears, but two massive stone gargoyles, their eyes glowing with malevolent red light, their wings folded in a silent, eternal threat. The shock of the concrete image jolted her back to reality. Her eyes flew open as the supporting wind gently lowered her back to the mossy ground. "What did you see?" Damien asked, his gaze intense. Lilith stared at him, her chest heaving. "Guards," she whispered. "There are gargoyles." The silence in the clearing was heavy, broken only by Lilith's ragged breaths. "Gargoyles," she repeated, the word tasting of dust and dread. Damien didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, his expression resolute. "Then that's where we begin. I'll help you fight them. Fight them. Inside my own mind. It's where the battle truly is," he said. "May I enter?" The thought was terrifying. Letting someone into the chaotic, dangerous landscape of her psyche. But it was Damien. She gave a tight, nervous nod. "Close your eyes," he instructed, sitting opposite her again. He placed his hands on hers, his touch cool and steady. "Follow my breath." Lilith did as she was told. She felt a strange sensation, not an intrusion, but a gentle merging, like a second stream joining her own. When she opened her eyes, her mind's eyes, she was no longer in the clearing. She stood before the grim, towering citadel of her power. And beside her, solid and real in this mental realm, stood Damien. The gargoyles stirred, stone grinding against stone as their glowing red eyes fixed upon the intruders. "Your mind, your rules," Damien said, his voice echoing slightly in the psychic space. "You are not a victim here. You are the master of this castle." As the first gargoyle lunged, its claws rending the air, Lilith flinched. But Damien was there, a shield of solidified wind deflecting the blow. "Strike not with physical force, but with will," he commanded. Emboldened, Lilith focused. She imagined chains of pure light erupting from the ground, wrapping around the creature's legs. To her astonishment, they obeyed her will, glowing brightly. The gargoyle roared in frustration. Damien engaged the second, a whirlwind of air and focused intent, keeping it occupied. They are fear given form. Disbelieve their power. Together they fought. Lilith learned to shape her psychic energy into barriers and blades of light. She was clumsy at first, but with each parry and thrust, her confidence grew. Damien was a perfect partner. His elemental magic a complementary force to her psychic will, never overpowering, always supporting. Finally, with a combined surge of wind and blinding psychic energy, the two stone guardians shattered into clouds of harmless dust. Before them stood the final door, immense and carved with runes that pulsed with a dark, inner light. Damien turned to her, his form beginning to look slightly translucent. "This is as far as I can go, Lilith. The final battle, the one for your very core. It's yours alone to fight." He gave her an encouraging smile. "Be strong." Before she could protest, he dematerialized into a wisp of breeze, leaving her utterly alone before the door. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Lilith pushed it open. The room within was a perfect, dark mirror of her own mind. And standing in the center, surrounded by swirling shadows, was herself. But this Lilith had eyes of bottomless obsidian and a cruel, mocking smirk. "So, the weakling finally arrives," the demon Lilith sneered, her voice a distorted echo of her own. You are unworthy of this power. You fear it. You cower from it. You would rather throw yourself from a cliff than claim what is rightfully yours. No, Lilith whispered, horrified. Yes, the demon hissed. You are a pitiful creature, defined by the fear of others. You don't deserve to wield me. She raised a hand, and a blast of pure, concentrated malice erupted from her. A wave of psychic energy so potent it felt like the end of the world. Lilith had no time to defend herself. The force hurled her backward, through the door, out of the citadel, and she gasped, her eyes flying open as she was thrown back into her physical body, stumbling into Damien's waiting arms in the sunlit clearing. He helped her steady herself, his face etched with concern. What happened? What did you see? Trembling, she told him. She described the mirrored self, the venomous words, the overwhelming power. She's right, Lilith finished, her voice breaking. I'm not going back. I can't. You have to, Damien said, his voice firm but gentle. She is the embodiment of everything you fear about yourself. If you don't face her, she will forever be the warden of your power. I can't defeat that. You can. But this time you will be ready. Lilith was just about to object, to tell him it was impossible, when he reached out and took both of her hands in his. The contact was electric, silencing her protests. He looked directly into her eyes, his hazel gaze seeming to see straight into her fractured soul. Lilith, he said, his voice low and intense. Do you trust me? Caught in the web of his magical eyes, feeling the steady, sure strength of his hands in hers, the fight drained out of her. There was only one answer, one truth that had begun on a cliff's edge. She nodded. The 2 months that followed were a transformation. Under Damien's patient guidance, Lilith's fear began to morph into focus. Her psychic power, once a wild storm, became a tool. She learned to channel it, not from a place of dread, but from a core of growing strength. In their sun-dappled clearing, she could now lift stones, rearrange fallen branches, and create shimmering shields of mental energy. Each success was punctuated by Damien's proud smiles and the occasional electrifying brush of his hand against her arm, a touch that felt as magical as any spell. One afternoon, by the serene lake, Damien expanded her horizon. Psychics aren't feared for their power alone, Lilith, he explained, his gaze intense. They're feared for their potential. You aren't limited to thoughts and telekinesis. Your mind can impose its will on reality itself. You can command the elements without a single drop of elemental blood in your veins. He gestured to the water. It is not water. It is a collection of molecules, vibrating with energy. Your mind can speak to that energy. You can convince it to move for you. For what felt like an hour, Lilith stared at the lake, her brow furrowed in concentration. Nothing happened. Frustration bubbled up, the familiar shadow of her insecurities threatening to return. Then Damien moved behind her. He didn't touch her at first, but his presence was a solid, calming force. Breathe, Lilith, he whispered, his voice soft and intimate, his breath stirring the hair by her ear. Stop trying to force it. Feel the space between the droplets. Feel the potential for movement. Now, gently, suggest it. He placed his hands lightly on her shoulders, and a surge of clarity washed over her. It was as if his calm flowed into her. She closed her eyes, and this time she didn't push. She invited. She persuaded. A tremor rippled across the lake's surface. Then, slowly, impossibly, a tendril of water, clear and shimmering, lifted from the surface. It coiled in the air, a liquid serpent dancing to the tune of her thoughts. A gasp of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her. The water splashed back down, but the triumph remained. She spun around, her eyes wide with elation. I did it. Damien, I did it. Without a second thought, she threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into a tight, exuberant hug. He held her just as tightly, a low laugh rumbling in his chest. The celebration shifted. The energy between them crackled, the professional boundary between tutor and student dissolving in the face of months of shared vulnerability, trust, and unspoken longing. Lilith pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, and what she saw there, a mirror of her own awe and fierce affection, stole her breath. The distance between their lips vanished. The kiss was not gentle. It was a conflagration, a release of all the pent-up emotion they had carefully banked. It was the answer to the question he had asked her twice before. "Do you trust me?" This was her answer, given not with a nod, but with her entire being. His arms encircled her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other splayed against the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. The world narrowed to the feel of his lips on hers, the taste of him, the scent of ozone and pine that was uniquely his. Clothes became obstacles, discarded in a hushed, frantic series of whispers and soft laughter. The soft moss by the lake became their sanctuary, dappled by the setting sun. His touches were not those of a magician, but of a lover, reverent, exploring, and fiercely possessive. Every caress was a silent incantation, every sigh a shared spell. When he finally sheathed himself within her, it felt less like a joining of bodies and more like a final, perfect merging of their magics. Her psychic energy flared, not with destructive fear, but with luminous, golden light, intertwining with the gentle whirlwind of his air magic that rustled the leaves above them. It was not a battle for control, but a surrender to a connection more profound than any magic. In that clearing, as the stars began to pepper the twilight sky, Lilith didn't conquer her power. She became one with it, guided by the one person who had taught her that her heart, not her fear, was the truest source of her strength. "You think I can do this?" Lilith asked Damien, rusting his judgment. He led her to the clearing, lowering her into a lotus position. "My bet's on you. Kick their asses." She was right about him. He always knew how to jumpstart her spirit. A surge of hope sizzles through her. She exhales deeply, transporting her consciousness to the depth of her core. The familiar, grim citadel of her mind felt different this time. The air still thrummed with latent power, but the gargoyles were gone, leaving only the immense rune-carved door. Lilith pushed it open, and there she was, the obsidian-eyed mirror of herself, waiting with a cruel, knowing smile. "You're back," the demon Lilith purred. "But you didn't come alone, did you? You brought him. You cling to him like a child, hoping his strength will be yours. I can smell that little residual fear. The fear of being alone, of being without him." Anger, hot and reckless, flared in Lilith's stomach. She wouldn't let this thing tarnish what she had with Damien. With a cry, she launched a volley of pure psychic energy, sharp and intent on destruction. The demon merely flicked a wrist, dissipating the attack like smoke. All emotion, no control. Still a child. She countered with a whip of crimson flame that caught Lilith across the chest, hurling her backward. The pain was searing, both physical and mental, a burn of pure fear. Lilith stumbled to her knees, the old dread enveloping her. She was going to fail. Again. "You are weak," the demon hissed, stalking forward. "A coward, always looking for a shortcut, for someone to save you." From the shadowy ground, thick, thorned vines the color of blood erupted, wrapping around Lilith's limbs and torso, squeezing the air from her lungs. They were the vines of her deepest fears, of being a monster, of being unlovable, of her own devastating power. She struggled, but the thorns dug deeper, feeding on her panic. "You are stronger than you think." Damien's voice, clear and calm, cut through the static of her terror. It wasn't in the room with her. It was a memory, an echo anchored in her heart. She clung to it. Taking a shuddering breath, she stopped fighting the vines. Instead, she pressed her palm flat against the bare, dark earth of her own psyche. She thought of the clearing, of the lake, of the living world Damien had taught her to connect with. She didn't demand power, she asked for help. A surge of energy, green and vibrant and ancient, answered her call. It flowed from the ground, up her arm, and filled her being. The thorns of the fear vines began to wither and crack. With a final, powerful burst of will, Lilith shattered them. She rose, her feet lifting from the ground, levitating in the center of the chamber. Her eyes flooded with a brilliant, piercing white light, and her hair streamed around her like a flowing, ethereal train. The demon stared, its smirk finally wiped away. "What is this?" "This is me," Lilith's voice echoed with dual tones, her own and something timeless and powerful. She thrust her hands downward, and water, clear and pure, erupted from the earth, coiling around the demon, trapping it in a swirling, relentless prison. "No!" the demon shrieked, but its voice was muffled. Lilith closed her fist. The water solidified, freezing instantly into a block of perfect, clear ice. For a moment, the demon was preserved within, a statue of her own terror. Then, with a thought, Lilith made the ice shatter, bursting into a million glittering, harmless particles that vanished into mist. Silence. She floated downward, her feet touching the floor as the white light in her eyes receded. Before her, where the demon had stood, was the true core of her magic, a brilliant, swirling nebula of light, bound by the last remaining chains of her fear. She reached out, and with a gentle touch, the chains fell away. The core rushed into her, not as a violent takeover, but as a homecoming. It was acceptance. It was power finally and completely her own. Her spirit returned to her body in a gasp. She stood in the clearing, the setting sun casting long shadows. Her eyes flickered with a final pulse of white light before settling into their normal hue, now clearer and brighter than ever before. Damien stood a few feet away, his face a canvas of awe and pride. "Lilith," he breathed. "You did it." Tears of relief and joy welled in her eyes. She crossed the space between them and he met her halfway, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. When he pulled back, his hands came up to cradle her face. "I am so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. This time, their kiss was not a spark of newfound passion, but a deep, sealing vow. It was slow and profound, a communication of shared struggles, unwavering trust, and a love that had been forged in the darkest parts of her soul. It was a promise of a new beginning together. As the stars emerged overhead, they stood entwined in the clearing, their future, for the first time, blazing with limitless and radiant light. It didn't take long for Damien and Lilith to get used to being naked together in the clearing. The soft ripples from the lake, coupled with the gentle caress of the breeze, made love-making memorable for them. That day was no different. The warmth of the sun on their bare skin felt like a lie. Lying in the mossy clearing, wrapped in Damien's arms, Lilith felt a cold dread as his words hung in the air. "Our sessions are over, Lilith. You've mastered everything I can teach you." She sat up abruptly, pulling the blanket around her. "What?" "Well, tell my parents I'm not ready. Tell them I need more time." Damien gave her a soft, placating smile, reaching to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not leaving you. I'll always come to visit you. This just means you don't need a tutor anymore." But the visits soon replaced the training, and even they began to change. When Lilith, curled against him one evening, asked where he lived, he deftly turned the question into a joke, kissing her forehead and asking if she planned to stalk him. The evasion was slick, clever, and it planted a seed of cold doubt in her heart. He was hiding something. Then the avoidance began. He missed their meetings. Her calls went unanswered, her messages unread. The silence was a void where her fears multiplied. Driven by a desperate, clawing need for the truth, she remembered his lessons. Your mind is unlimited. It can find anything if you know how to listen. She launched herself into the sky, soaring high above the clouds, leaving the world behind. She closed her eyes, shutting out the wind, and cast her psychic senses out like a net. A million voices, a cacophony of thoughts and lives, flooded her mind. She sifted through them, searching for the one unique mental signature that felt like calm winds and safety. She found it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, pensive rhythm of hope and terror. She dove, a falling star of vengeance and heartbreak, landing silently on the manicured lawn of an estate in a neighboring coven. She moved like a ghost to the lit window of a bedroom. And there he was, Damien, shirtless, his back to her. And wrapped in his arms was Instructor Morwen. Her face flushed with a smug triumph Lilith remembered all too well from the coven. "Tell me," Morwen purred, her voice dripping through the glass. "That little psychic freak, or me. Who do you love?" Damien laughed, a sound that shattered Lilith's world. "You, of course." Lilith was a job. Pathetic, lonely girl. An easy target. "It's done." The words were a detonation. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Lilith stood in the wreckage, her eyes burning with a hellish crimson light, her hair whipping in a psychic gale. The rage was a living thing, cold and absolute. "You," Damien gasped, scrambling back, his face a mask of pure terror. Instructor Morwen screamed and hurled a nearby chair with a flick of her wrist. It disintegrated into splinters before it got within a foot of Lilith. "Please," Morwen begged, trying to scramble away. Lilith didn't even gesture. The air around her former teacher solidified, freezing her in a prison of invisible force, a statue of wide-eyed fear. Damien was lifted into the air by an unseen hand, clutching at his throat as psychic energy choked the life from him. "Lilith, please. I'm sorry." "Sorry." Lilith's voice was layered with 1,000 whispers, the sound of a breaking soul. "You made me believe I was worthy of love. That was your greatest cruelty." Before she could decide his fate, a circle of flames erupted around the ruined house. Powerful figures emerged from the shadows, the head witches of the surrounding covens, their wands and staves raised. Damien had managed to call them. "Lilith of the Fire Dust Coven." The lead witch boomed. "Stand down. Your power is no match for our combined strength." Lilith slowly turned her crimson gaze from the choking Damien to the circle of witches. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her lips. The air grew heavy, the very light seeming to bend and dim around her. "You think," she whispered, the sound carrying to every ear, "you can hold me down?" She raised her hands, and the world began to scream. The ground trembled, the foundations of the house cracked, and the combined magic of the head witches began to flicker and strain against the raw, unbounded darkness she had finally, fully embraced. The monster they had always feared was born not in a classroom, but in a broken heart, and she was just getting started. The circle of head witches glowed with combined power, a kaleidoscope of elemental and arcane energy meant to bind and subdue. They were the realm's finest, A-rank masters of their craft. To them, Lilith was a dangerous child, a storm to be weathered. They were wrong. She was the hurricane, the lead which threw a lance of solidified light. Lilith didn't block it. She caught it in her mind, her crimson gaze flickering, and the lance shattered into 1,000 harmless shards that vaporized before they hit the ground. A collective gasp went through the circle. Their combined shield wavered. "Now," one of them yelled, "while she's distracted." They were not distracting her. They were feeding her. A vortex of psychic power erupted from Lilith. It wasn't a single attack, but 1,000 invisible blades of force, telekinetic throws that slammed witches into trees, and psychic screams that shattered their mental defenses. One by one, their brilliant auras were snuffed out. Some were frozen solid, their faces locked in final screams. Others were crushed by the very earth they stood on, as Lilith twisted the ground beneath them. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and iron. With each life extinguished, a hollow whispering echo filled the cavern of her mind. Or, "They feared you. They all deserve it." Or, the bloodlust was a sweet, dark poison, and she drank it deeply. Through the carnage, she saw Damien, scrambling in the dirt, trying to summon a flicker of his wind magic to escape. A bitter, broken laugh escaped Lilith's lips. He gathered a pathetic flame in his palm and hurled it at her. A final, desperate act of betrayal. Lilith looked at the sputtering fire, and with a thought, she unwove its nature. The flame did not vanish. It obeyed its new master. It swelled, turning from orange to a deep, soul-searing blue, and shot back towards its caster. It enveloped him. His scream was short, swallowed by the roar of the magical fire that consumed him until nothing remained but ash and memory. The hollow voices in her head cheered, growing louder, more insistent. They were no longer echoes. They were a chorus, and she was their conductor. The last vestiges of the girl who feared her power were drowning, and the demon she had once defeated in her mind was now wearing her skin. She turned her gaze towards the neighboring coven, its lights twinkling innocently in the night. The whispers demanded a sacrifice. She gave them one. It was not a battle. It was an eradication. Homes were torn from their foundations. Fields were scoured into glass. The terrified thoughts of the inhabitants were a symphony she conducted to a final, silent crescendo. She felt no pleasure, only a vast, cold emptiness that the whispers filled with their dark approval. Then she went home. The grand atrium of the fire dust coven, where her nightmare had begun, was her next canvas of destruction. The familiar towers crumbled. The protective runes flared and died under the weight of her despair. She heard the screams of her former classmates, their teachers, but they were just noise. The whispers were her only truth now. It was there, amidst the smoke and ruin of her old school, that she heard them. Two voices that, for a fleeting second, pierced the static. Lilith! Stop, my child, please. Her parents, Gandalf and Edna, stood at the edge of the devastation, their faces etched with horror and a desperate, unconditional love. For a single, heart-wrenching moment, Lilith faltered. Her crimson eyes flickered. She saw her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's pleading look. They lie, the voices hissed, cold and final. They always feared you. They sent you away. They are no different. The moment shattered. Lilith raised a hand, her power gathering to sweep them away like all the rest. In the chaos, a massive, burning support beam, dislodged from the collapsing school, groaned and fell. It happened too fast for even magic to prevent. With a sickening crash of stone and timber, it pinned Edna to the ground. The world snapped back into brutal, silent focus. The whispers vanished. The crimson light died in Lilith's eyes, leaving them wide and clear and horrified. The torrent of power ceased. No! The scream was hers again, a young woman's voice, raw with agony. She flew down, landing softly amidst the rubble. Gandalf was already there, on his knees, heaving at the massive stone, his sobs racking his entire body. Edna's lifeless eyes stared up at the smoky sky. Lilith reached a trembling hand toward her mother. "Don't you touch her." Gandalf's voice was a broken roar. He looked up at her, his face a mask of grief and utter revulsion. "Don't you dare. You are unworthy of touching her. You are no daughter of mine. You are a monster. Get out of my sight. Leave." The words were a final, killing blow. They struck with more force than any spell. Lilith stood, empty and shattered. The immensity of what she had done crashed down upon her, and there was no demon, no whisper to blame. It was all her. She looked at her father weeping over her mother, at the ruins of her home, at the death she had sown as far as she could see. Without a word, she turned and flew. She flew until her magic grew weary, over forests and mountains, until she found a distant, forgotten peak deep within an untamed jungle. There, in a cave overlooking a world she had sworn never to touch again, she made her prison. Not of stone, but of solitude. She would live out her days there, alone with the ghosts of everyone she had ever loved and everyone she had ever killed, forever terrified that the hollow whispers were not gone, but only waiting.